This is a CBC podcast.
Support for delivery of this podcast comes from the all-new 2008 Cadillac CTS. Be an original. Visit cadillac.gm.ca.
I'm Paul Kennedy with the ideas of Leonore Tiefer. Leonore Tiefer has declared war on pharmasex. The pioneering sexologist thinks the pharmaceutical industry is reshaping the way we think about our bodies and how we practice sex. Leonore Tiefer believes if men learned how to dance and diaper babies, not at the same time, of course, maybe we wouldn't need Viagra. In other words, sex involves two people. It's not about obsessing over how the equipment works. Leonore Tiefer is smart, funny, controversial. A feminist who calls herself a revolutionary on behalf of sex. In her landmark book, Sex is Not a Natural Act, and other essays, Leonore Tiefer describes the consequences of living in a hypersexualized culture. Constant images of sex bombard and numb us. Plastic surgery creates the improved or perfect body. Drugs can help us perform. And this is killing sexual creativity. Leonore Tiefer reminds us that we're diverse creatures, shaped by cultural, historical, social, and individual forces, a recurring theme in her collection of essays.
A kiss is not a kiss in this perspective. Your orgasm is not the same as George Washington's. Premarital sex in Peru is not premarital sex in Peoria. Abortion in Rome at the time of Caesar is not abortion in Rome at the time of John Paul II. All of these actions remain to be defined by individual experience within one's period and place.
Leonore Tiefer believes that as a culture, we're losing sight of this richness and diversity, and an increasing homogeneity is creating an epidemic of insecurity around sex and our bodies. A Jewish sexologist from the Bronx, Leonore Tiefer is clinical associate professor of psychiatry at the New York University School of Medicine. She lectures around the world and still maintains a private practice in sex therapy in Manhattan. Ideas producer Mary O'Connell sat down to speak with Leonore Tiefer about sex.
Now, in your book, Sex is Not a Natural Act, and other essays, you talk about expectations, you talk about a lot of anxiety that's created by the importance of sex. But first of all, I want to ask you about the title.
Sex is not a natural act?
Yes.
Well, it really sums up my most profound insight and the message that I want to get across. Obviously, it's sort of funny and provocative, but the point is that people rely on the assumed naturalness of sexuality like dying people hanging on to the side of a sinking ship. I mean, it's kind of a desperate conviction rather than anything that they've arrived at as the result of observation or reflection. My belief is that if you keep your eyes open and if you reflect about things, you'll realize that sex isn't natural at all, that it has a whole lot to do with culture and media and previous experience and expectations and so on. So I thought that Sex is Not a Natural Act really, it kind of summarizes this counterintuitive notion that is at the heart of my philosophy and my therapy and my research.
Do we think that everyone else is having more sex than we are? I mean, what is our idea about ourselves and our sexuality and others?
I feel quite certain that 200 or 300 years ago, much less 500 or 1,000 years ago, nobody could care less about how much sex other people were having. It was not a priority. But in the last 50 years or so, increasingly so, maybe even escalating over the last 10 or 15 or 20 years, sex has become so much a measure of one's worth in a relationship and in society that adequacy and frequency and all of these things have taken on great meaning. I think that's becoming more true for men, I have to say. I see a lot of men in my practice who are feeling pressured to have sex to prove that they're okay.
Feeling pressure from?
Peers, peer pressure, and, internalized. You internalize these norms. I think of the case I saw last night, 24-year-old guy, and he's only had 3 partners, and he's absolutely convinced that he's like so far behind his peers. It's tragic.
And he's deeply troubled by this.
He's deeply troubled. Now, all of these things fall on fertile ground. It's the anxious person, the obsessional person, the perfectionistic person, and so on. People don't think that these things affect them. Mm-hmm. So nowadays, it's important people feel that they have a sense of whether they're normal, whether they're in the ballpark. On the cover of every magazine, how to have sex 25 ways, how to keep your guy, how to look good, liposuction. And you can't sort of go 2 steps without some sexual image crossing your path.
Well, do you think we live in a hypersexualized culture in terms of the imagery? In terms of...
Is there a stronger word than hypersexualized?
I don't know.
Yeah, out of control, over the top, ridiculously so, yes. So that people are being taught to be highly desirous. And whatever desire people used to have, which was kind of a, on again, off again thing, and depended a lot on the novelty of a relationship or personality or previous experience, or it was just kind of people are come out of the egg different in terms of their interest in sexuality. There was a huge amount of variation. That variation is being eliminated as a kind of standardized image is promoted that says do it a lot, want it a lot, enjoy it a lot, flaunt it a lot, brag about it a lot, and that's this inexhaustibility thing.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've written that the word impotent was rarely mentioned in the psychological literature for decades, like it didn't even exist, but that this started to change by the 1980s with the emergence of what some call phallocentrism. What does this mean?
I think the phallocentrism of our time is symbolized perhaps best by the explosion around Viagra. Mm-hmm. I think that the advertising campaign promoted by Pfizer and the other companies now that there are other drugs out there on the market, and Viagra is not all by its lonesome anymore, but all of the advertising campaigns have promoted the idea that the success of erection has become wildly overstated as the centerpiece and sine qua non of a successful sexual experience and sexual life, and everything else just kind of comes along automatically. There's never any talk about tenderness or romance or know what you're doing or not all women like a hard penis or this. I mean, all of that is completely invisible.
And what does this do to the partner? And we're talking heterosexually here, to the woman. I'm just wondering on a psychological level.
Well, I'll tell you, I really would like to see a lot of research on this. Of course, the companies that fuel the research on Viagra and the other drugs are not very interested in finding out any bad news. So there's very little research. Mm-hmm. But what limited research there is, and there's maybe 4 or 5 studies I know from New Zealand and Australia in particular, 2 or 3 from the U.S., a couple from England, but it's consistent in saying that women's experiences are diverse. Mm-hmm. Some women are thrilled to bits, some women are horrified, disgusted, and turned off. And some women are tolerant, and some women are angry, and some women are just patient. Mm-hmm. If those relationships were humdrum or uncommunicative or boring or painful or coercive or whatever, they're probably going to be the same way with the drug as without the drug. If, on the other hand, the relationships were more mutual and inventive and creative and, had some energy and effort in them, then they'll kind of incorporate drugs in the same way they might incorporate a vibrator or incorporate memories or incorporate a glass of wine or incorporate whatever. Of course, those are the relationships that probably don't even need the drugs.
I guess is there something implicit with the use of Viagra that it will improve other areas of the relationship as well?
I think it's implied.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember the first set of ads that came out in 1998 showed a couple dancing. And she was wearing high heels, and she had a really, nice little dress, and she had a big smile on her face, and they were dancing. Well, dancing is, how many women have desperately tried to get their husband to go dancing, and the impression was, hey, you give him this pill and he'll want to go dancing. So,
right.
Not only was the implication that the drug would restore the choreography of their sex life, but it would make him a more romantic person also. Well, show me the evidence for that.
Right.
The point is, we all change our physiology month to month, year to year. Things ache, they break, you have a cold, the kid is sick, you get poor, you get rich. Life, you change. And so your sexual experience changes along with it. And if you go through a period of time where you can't perform the intercourse in the usual way, well, you do something else and enjoy that. It's about pleasure. That's a thing that totally blows my mind. And to get back to phallocentrism, I do think that this is a critical issue, and that is that Viagra is clearly linked to vaginal intercourse. One of the things I was concerned a lot about, and there again is very limited research on this, but that suggests that there's changes in foreplay as a result of taking these drugs. It cost me $10. I want to get my money's worth here. Let us not fool around. Let's get right to it.
Right.
We are nothing but physicality. I'm sitting here in a chair. It's the physical me. I don't exist, as some kind of floating spiritual essence.
Well, you do in radio, though.
Let's hear it for radio. I don't think people take the Viagra as part of the fun part of the experience. I think they take the Viagra as insurance against failure. And I've spilled so much blood and so much ink trying to explore how it is that people are more willing to adopt a physical explanation for things than a psychological or social or cultural or interpersonal one. It's amazing. People would rather have something broken. They'd rather have low hormones, or they'd rather have a vascular blockage, or than be thought of as anxious. People want to think of themselves in a way that I find astonishing as kind of robotic. But I know that treating something that's psychological is not that difficult. It's not that difficult, and it's even fun. It's about learning. It's about talking. It's about thinking about things in a new way. It's not insoluble. Somehow, a lot of the people sort of behind the engine of Viagra have come out and said, well, they, the psychologists, the psychotherapists, they haven't been able to solve this for hundreds and thousands and millions of years. Thank God we've got pills now. That isn't true. I've been treating people with all kinds of sexual problems for decades, and I know lots and lots and lots of other people who've also been treating couples and individuals in a psychological way with success. But the rap, the rhetoric, the myth is that a psychological problem is demeaning, it's insoluble.
It's weak.
my feeling is exactly the opposite. Pills? Pills have side effects. Pills are dangerous. Pills interact with other pills. Pills cost money. You have to remember to take them. Whereas your attitudes you have with you all the time.